am here with the amazing Leslie Labowitz-Starus or Starus?
It's Labowitz, and it's Starus, but usually in our world I just say Labowitz. Starus is my real life name. I just kind of choose which one I want to use when.
Depends on how you're tagged.
Yeah,
I think I tagged you someplace and Starus wasn't there.
Right.
Yeah. Leslie and I met, I think the first time was after the Now Be Here, was at the conversation. There was, I don't know if everybody remembers, there was a big photograph a few years ago called Now Be Here by, Kim Schoenstatt, and of women artists. There were over 700 women artists. And afterwards, like a week later, they had a talk that I think it was hosted by Metabolic Studio, and Shane and East Dambrot was one of the speakers, and there were probably 20 or 30 women there. And Leslie was there, and so we officially met on that day. And then I think we emailed each other a couple times and said, let's do studio visits, and 2 years later, maybe, I went to Leslie's studio in Santa Monica and did a studio visit, and I was there 4 hours, and we just had this great talk about performance, about being an entrepreneur today, about our careers. It was wonderful, and I knew with this project, and I was already working on the project, Leslie was so generous and available for advice over the project, over the catalog, the introduction. I think when you offered to read it, and I had 5 paragraphs, and then it ended up being 6 pages for my introduction. And I mean, I can't say enough. It's been just amazing working with Leslie. And then I asked if she would, do a conversation with me, and she graciously said yes, and so here we are.
Yeah, that's pretty much says it all. I mean, I think that in that conversation we had at 18th Street Art Center, which is where I have my studio, I just felt a connection to you that I hadn't felt necessarily with other younger artists, in this new generation of artists, and really that was partly because we were able to sit and talk. I'm sure that if I were together with other artists, I would connect too, but I think that the thing that really drew me to you was we have some parallels in our work, in that I was an entrepreneur as well, or I still consider myself an entrepreneur, and I started an artwork that I'm most known for the works I did on violence against women with Suzanne Lacy. We were collaborators. We did from 77 to 82. We worked on different public event performances and media performances, and very much work with the Women's Building. Ann Galvin is here from the Women's Building. She's an old friend. Hopefully Sherry Galkey's going to come and she can add to the conversation about the art at the Women's Building. But after that work, I was pretty burnt out. It was hard work. I was in my 30s. I was doing it kind of like what you did, and then I began other kind of work, a work called Sprout Time, which is like a 30-year-old performance. It's over 30 years I've been doing this work, and it's a live art performance, and it has various pieces to it, but one of the pieces was that part of the artwork, I was an urban farmer, and I was doing organic food, and I turned it into these performances that I performed kind of all over the country, where I would hang these indoor gardens of food, and to kind of to talk about a lot of different things. I could spend the whole time talking about this, but I'm not going to. But there's a lot of layers to this work. It has to do with my own healing, from the work that I did on violence against women, from growing up in a family where my parents were Holocaust survivors, and so it's layered, all of this stuff with growing and food and everything. But the thing that was the parallel, I think, was that for me, I wasn't a therapy process. I wasn't therapy, and I heard you say that even on the last the last video you did with Alexandra, that you go into therapy and like that gives you so many ideas for your creative. And I think that in my case that was true too. At least the first 8 years, 10 years of this work that I was working on is that I was in therapy, and that therapy kind of fed my art. And I don't think I could have done what I did without that therapy. And you know, given the subjects that Kristine is working with, I think that's probably true as well. And the courage that it takes to take those risks of putting something that is deep in your consciousness and in your psyche, putting it out there. It's a very hard thing to do. When I was doing it for other women, with violence against women, that was easy for me. I didn't have this kind of weird feeling of, oh, I don't know, I'm afraid, or, you know, all those kind of inner doubts. But when it was about my inner world, I felt a lot more self-conscious about doing it. And so in my world, this work ended up being a business called Sprout Time, because when I was growing all these things, people wanted them and they wanted to eat them, and it was the time when all that organic food was becoming important and needed. So I just followed the path, and I went into this business. I wanted to have a child, and I knew that I couldn't do that with a regular job, a 9-to-5 job, and I wasn't getting, and teaching jobs at that time were so scarce that you had to travel all over the country for one semester and then another semester, and it just wasn't feeding the quality of life that I wanted to live. So I felt like, okay, well, this is in my lap, I'll do this. And I started the business, and I ran it for 30 years, and that was how I made my living, and here comes Sherry, yay. Perfect timing. And so after, you know, running the business and becoming an entrepreneur, people used to say to me in the art world, oh, I'm so sorry you have to do that. Like this was a bad thing. And I'm like thinking, why are they thinking this is a bad thing? I'm able to make a living. I'm able to do kind of what I want to do. It's still my mission. I'm able to live my mission with, you know, the kind of foods that I believe in. But the art world wasn't ready for that kind of thing at that time. And I think, again, that was a parallel with PR, shoebox PR. I was watching her on Facebook all the time, as we all do. You know, no one does more Facebook than Kristine. And so I kept thinking, wow, you know what? She's doing such a great service for artists by doing this. And I'm so impressed that she's doing this. And I felt like it was just another reason why I wanted to meet her. And so we talked about it at 18th Street when we met, and then she told me about her Perceive Me project, and I said, well, tell me a little bit more about your older work, how you got into this. And I think I was impressed with, you know, I came from a time when I had no female teachers. I had no feminist knowledge of women's art. I knew nothing. You had, from what I gathered, you had great teachers, Betty Brown, and you can go into this more when I just say it. She had great teachers. She knew about women's artists. She was coming from a place of, I wouldn't say it's support and recognition of who you were. Mm-hmm. Whereas in my art world, the art world that I was in the 70s, early 70s, it was like I had to become somebody else, or I had to become neutral. I had to look like a guy, or I was in conceptual art, or I did things that were not about me at all. And so I was just really seeing how the generations have changed over time, and that women artists can get that now from their education if they're in the right place. And then again, the other relationship is that I think that all this work on her body is her healing. It's her stages of healing, as my artwork was my stages of healing, and still is, actually. So I wanted to talk, hopefully we're going to talk about that, is that, and I consider this a performance. Everything I was doing was a performative act, and I wanted, you know, Kristine to address that today, because I think that when you see this exhibition, you're overwhelmed by the beauty of the actual artworks. And if you don't know anything about who she is or what she's done, you miss that part of the work, which I think is, for me, you know, it's not the best part of the work, but it's a very important part of how it was conceived. So I think that's our story, and I would like it maybe if Kristine would tell about from, you know, your early work leading up to this, and then maybe after that we could talk about the performance itself and how performance, the roots of performance that kind of led to where you are. Okay?
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if I considered myself a performance artist from the beginning. I started off as a painter, and then I took painting classes at the junior college, and I worked with Cynthia Minette, who's a Los Angeles artist, and then when I went to Cal State Northridge, I studied with Betty Brown and Samantha Fields. I just had the thought, and of course it went away. I started working on, or focusing on my body in 2008 when I was working on my master's degree at Cal State Northridge. And that's at the same time as when I realized I had an eating disorder. I was also in what's called Second Life, which is an online, 3D online virtual world. And I had an avatar, which was my ideal self, tall, thin, blonde. And through grad school, through Samantha Fields, I had actually studied art history. I studied feminist art history, women's art history. I studied African art history, so I knew about performance and masquerade. I was going to write my thesis on Cindy Sherman and ideas of masquerade. And so I was very familiar with that, but looking at it like from an art history vantage point was different than looking at it from myself from an artistic vantage point. And so then I realized, like working with Samantha Fields, that, well, of course my avatar is my masquerade. And then I started really thinking about why that was, who she was to me, and then I started looking at her as performance. And so from then, it's funny, I actually didn't even think of this as performance until we started talking. And really dissecting it, even though a lot of my work had been performance-based before. But after I realized I had an eating disorder, I started to, through therapy, thinking about how to kind of tell my story and talk about it and get my message out there. And, you know, the message where I wanted to help people. I wanted to empower others like me to either get help or just to talk about that it's, you know, it's not, like being fat or having an eating disorder or mental health, there's a stigma against it and there shouldn't be. And so I think I wanted to use my art to get the message out there to take away that stigma. And of course, this project is a huge part of that by putting myself literally out there. I started to use my body personally, I did a series called Plus, which was 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago now. And it happened by mistake, or not by mistake. It was a happy accident, spontaneously in a hotel room. I used a bathroom door, and I leaned against, it was like a frosted glass door, and I saw the light coming through, and I'm like, oh, how fun. So I had my cell phone only, I didn't even have a camera. I set it on the bed, and I started like taking blast photos and putting it on timer, and I just posed nude behind the door, and so it was my silhouette. And I was having fun, I was like playing with my body in different ways, and realizing what my body could and couldn't do. You know, I could only hold my leg up for a couple seconds, you know, because I'm not that flexible, and my legs were sore, and so, but then after that, I happened to be in another hotel room that also had a frosted glass door, and I haven't been in one since with a frosted glass door, but in Palm Springs, so I played there also. And then, in fact, like Dina, she's like, oh, I have a shower that has a glass door. So friends started coming up and saying, oh, I have a place you can use. But, you know, I started thinking more about my body as a medium. as a medium for my art. And then I think what happened was I was posting those on social media, and Amanda Mears, who did a drawing of me, she saw that. And she saw, I had also worked with J. Michael Walker, who's one of the photos in the show, before Perceive Me. They had invited me to be in their projects because they saw how I was working with my body. And so I posed for them, and then that's kind of with a conversation with Amanda is how Perceive Me started. And then just the last year and a half since Perceive Me officially started, I've been like dissecting and challenging myself and thinking even more about how this is performance, how it fits in with, so many performance artists I've admired, throughout art history. And yeah.
Well, I think we talked about even before that you're still thinking about it.
Yes.
That what I was saying is that she's still in the performance. I mean, the exhibition is on, she's not done the end yet, that later, after this settles and there's an assimilation, she's going to be able to see that with some perspective. But right now, to even push yourself to do that probably is only going to make you frustrated. So, I mean, I think that we all know that when you get into these performances, you're just so in them that you don't see what they're about until later. But I wanted to ask you about something that I think is kind of, it relates to, again, the history of performance art. And every woman artist that I know in some form has used their body. I mean, it's just part of identifying who you are and being that woman. I mean, it may not be your major work right now, but somewhere in there you've done something about your body. When in 1971, I was still at Otis. I got my master's there. I did a performance, a menstruation weight. That was my first feminist performance. And I was dressed, I was in my studio. I just put up a sign that I was waiting for my period and all about the issues with women who are waiting to find out if they were pregnant or not pregnant and all the physical things that come up. And I just put a sign up and the school went crazy. They were going to kick me out of school, and they had a meeting and they said, well, they're only male teachers at that time. And they decided to keep me there because I could draw. That was their criteria. And so, that's just to give you an idea of, this is 50 is it 50 years now? It's hard to imagine, but it is 50 years. And of course, I didn't really spend much time in that arena, but one of the early things that feminist artists tend to do is look at what their body does and what are you doing with your body. So I did do a lot of things with my hair and with this and that, but it really wasn't it was like a road to the genre that I really wanted to be in. It wasn't exactly what I would call my work that I would continue with that looking at my body kind of thing. So I guess that the point I wanted to make, and I know Sherry Galkey's here and Ann Galton, they were collaborators and friends and everything else at the Women's Building, and I'm going to ask you to pipe in when, because I lived in Germany. After I left Otis, I had a Fulbright to work with Joseph Beuys, so I went to Germany and I lived there for 5 years, and that's where my education, political, social, art, kind of took place. Meanwhile, the Women's Building was happening here, and it was really grounding to have the Women's Building here. Because even when I was in Germany, people would ask me about the Women's Building. There was no internet. They only knew this through, I guess, talking, referrals, or letters or something. And I even sent a German artist to the Women's Building from that I had met in Germany. And so I guess that there was a point I was trying to make about this. And it has to do with safety and risk. And I guess that my experience of what the Women's Building was doing at the time is in the Feminist Studio Workshop, a lot of performance was taking place because women were looking at all the things that were buried inside of them about everything. And so they were doing performances, and then those performances became actual, let's say in an art context performance. And they were, the reason why most of the early work was done privately or a ritual or a private space is because of the feeling of fear, of exposing oneself in the public arena. So that's why you can imagine this kind of a thing is like, whoa. And everything was just done really personally, and you had support people, and you could tell your story and know you would be supported. I would like to ask Sherry and Anne to pipe in on that point before I go to the next point. Do you have anything to say?
I have a lot of
Go ahead. Go for it. Yeah, we're in conversation.
Yeah. Well, first, I wanted to share this thing that I say a lot and wrote, that when I was a little girl, I used to make my bed with precision movements, imagining the boy I was going to marry was watching my performance and judging it. And I think that, just the way we as women grow up in society and in the world, we are bodies. We grow up as bodies. And I was reminded of that, when I went to art school, when I was a freshman at art school, that the sculpture teacher would rate girls' butts, female art students' butts. And I was actually thrilled because I actually got a good rating. I always thought my butt was too big, but this male sculpture teacher thought I had a good butt. I got a pretty high score. And that my feminist consciousness was not there yet, that I realized what was going on, that I was still in that. And I was also thinking in terms of you and your body, I remember in drawing class, we had a large size model, and I loved her body. I would love the way that, her body reminded me of ears of corn, the way the folds would, and I remember sharing that with my teacher, and he was like, he was mad at the school for hiring her, because he didn't like looking at her body. So, but in terms of performance, we really, having a body was sort of what we had as women in society, and then we learn these skills of performance. We learn how to make up, we learn persona, and what were you calling it a minute ago? Masquerade. Yeah, you were talking masquerade. Yeah. So when we found performance art in the early 70s as this new art form, when we were creating this new form, it was like it really fit for us because it was skills that we had learned as women. And so that was great empowerment. And then the other thing I just wanted to comment on is this notion of time. That I was thinking about your menstruation waiting. That one of the ways in which I think women have innovated in performance art is this notion of performance art as a structure, as a time period in which things can take place. And so you certainly did that in 1971, and Suzanne Lacy did that with 3 weeks in May and created this time to contemplate rape in the city of Los Angeles, and you're doing that with this project. And it is something that is very much, I think, part of how women have innovated performance art as an art form. And now it's social practice. I mean, that's what artists are doing. That's what they're learning in school now. But that's something that I think really came out of us as women wanting to heal ourselves, create a time and space to heal ourselves, and also a time and space to really to make change and think, how can we change the situation we find ourselves in of being sexually violated or whatever it might be. So that's
that's good, Sherry. Thanks. I think that what I experienced, because like I said, I came back in 1977 from Germany, and what was so remarkable to me about the Women's Building was this vulnerability, the ability of those women to open their souls and the deep parts of themselves that were so hidden and ashamed of. And shame is a big deal, I think, when you look at women and they're revealing themselves, their bodies, their assaults, or whatever has happened to them. And I think that, I guess I refer now to the performance work here, because I go, okay, well, here is this woman now in today's time, and she's letting it all hang out as a performance, and I'm thinking, I could never do that, not even now. I mean, in a million years, I would not do that. And so I asked you maybe to tell us about your performance prior, not the exhibition, but the performance of your exhibition. A little bit about it. How it was for you. Break it down a little bit. I know we talked about doing that after too, but tell us about it.
Yeah. Really fast before I get into that, something that I was thinking that we were talking about earlier is the idea of this exhibition being here now at the college. We were talking about it that I wanted it at like a university, a college, an institution where the younger generation could see it. And it was, it wasn't easy getting it here, as Mika Cho, the director, who's been amazing in helping me get this here. It went through a committee, and there was some derision on the committee. And so, finally it was, they approved it. I've submitted it to other locations. It's going to travel to 6 other locations over the next couple of years. Colleges, universities, and a museum. But, there were several that wouldn't take it because of the nudity. And so, that's one thing based on what we were talking about. And then the other thing is like Facebook. And I've been banned from Facebook several times over the last year and a half during this project for posting nudity. And several of the artists were too, from posting their work. So, yeah. And, even though there was a law, there was something that went forward that you could post nude art on Facebook, but they still, so just the idea, I don't remember exactly how you were talking about it, but of the nude body today compared to like 50 years ago, and but also I've heard from many, many women today who are feminists, who, study feminist art, who have said the same thing. They couldn't do, this. They couldn't take off their clothes. They couldn't. And I have no idea what prompted me to do it. I mean, I never thought in a million years that I would use my body, that I would be posing nude for Austin Young in that way. And it is in a way, I don't want to say it's a masquerade, but in a way, each one of them are. I was shy at first, but I also knew I was working with professional artists, who have seen drawn from life many times. So I felt safe, talking about a safe space. I felt safe, men and women. It didn't matter. So I wasn't worried about that. I also didn't even think about the public necessarily. I mean, like Alexandra, I think, excuse me, Alexandra had asked, or it was talked about in the last talk about like if I've had any trolls or anything like that. And I haven't really, thankfully. Who knows what will happen once it really gets out there. But for me, the performative aspect of exhibiting, or actually somebody did message me and called me an exhibitionist. And so,
well, thank
you
you.
said that, I know.
Thank you.
Yeah. And he said he was too. And I said, but mine is about art. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter. It was this interesting conversation.
Do you consider yourself an exhibitionist?
No. I mean, and maybe I don't know the true definition.
I don't think
he didn't believe me.
I don't believe you.
But just think the word exhibition is
I know, exactly. As we've said, in a way I feel like I'm a performer.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know, it depends on what the definition of an exhibitionist is. But I feel like, my body is a work of art, just like all of our bodies is a work of art. I'm using it as the medium now, you know, for my work. I mean, I'm becoming my art literally also. But I feel, for me, because of my eating disorder, because of, you know, everything I've gone through in my life, I feel using my body is the best, the most efficient, the most reliable way to tell my story. And so if that means that I have to pose nude and that I have to show who I am, whether it's through a masquerade, whether it's, I don't even, like looking at these, people have asked me, or I've talked about each time I met with the artist, I felt like I had fun. I mean, I really, like with Austin Young, you know,
this is Austin
he's
Young?
the,
Video?
no, he's the photo on paper. You know, he bought the heels for me. And he's like, okay, you're gonna wear these. And, you know, he kind of had it planned out. And, you know, several of the artists said, okay, do you trust me? You know, will you play? And I'm like, sure, you know, it depends. But, and so I played, and, you know, with several of the artists, like, I felt like a supermodel. I felt sexy. I felt thin. I felt like, well, you can't tell it in that, but I was very uncomfortable. I'm like, those are stripper heels, and they weren't even on my feet all the time. You can't tell, but so I talk about this disconnection, and maybe that's part of the masquerade too, that of telling my story using my body is, you know, for the most part, I had fun, and I, you know, like I said, you know, you could see in like Doggy Wallace's pastel where she poured the paint on me. We had a blast doing that. We were laughing the whole time, and it was comfortable. And there were other ones that, like I said, weren't as comfortable. And I don't know if that exactly answered the question.
Well, what I want to go more into the performance side of it is that those of us that are performance artists know, and you are also a performance artist, you know, when you choose to do a performance and you evolved it, you know what you're doing, you kind of subconsciously go into another state of consciousness. You are different. And that's when you know you're in a performance and when you're not in a performance.
Yeah.
And especially when you're doing live art things, you really need to know that difference.
Yeah.
And so part of being in the performance is not exactly knowing that you're in it, but there is a shift in consciousness for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been nude in a piece I did in Franklin Furnace in New York. I don't think Sherry was there. It was LA
So
Lunch.
you're Sprouted? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's Sprouted.
Yeah. I did that, and I don't even remember feeling anything. I mean, I just really had my plan, had my script, followed what I said I was going to do, and did it. And it was only after when I started looking at this and going, oh my God, what's my daughter going to say, or something like that, you know, where I started feeling self-conscious again. So I do believe whether you think you're in a performative state or not, you probably are in it, still are in it, and you're not going to really know anything until this is over. I think that what's interesting about your performance is that it has these levels where you're having to collaborate at the same time, where you have people that are doing something for you, and then it becomes a collaboration. So the collaboration then is another form of the performance, and then the artist who's doing your work is another part of the performance.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm not sure if they would be able to do what they did without kind of moving into the performance with you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can look at the images and you can see that they gave their heart and soul to this. This is like pretty dramatic how each of these images has a life of its own, and you just really feel like the artist gave their all. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there is part of the performance, and then taking it into the social practice side, which Sherry brought up, I have a little bit of a problem with social practice and performance coming together, because a lot of social practice is really, now, if the artists who are doing it consider their community organizing and all their social work as a performance, that's different. But I'm not sure, because a lot of the stuff that I read on social practice projects, I'm not sure about that. I mean, they call the whole thing art, so I don't know, maybe that's something that someone else could address here. I just know that I'm a little bit mixed up about it, because I think that when we met, you know, that big collective thing that we saw, that we met at that photo shoot was done, I think that someone at Metabolic Studio was referring to it as social practice, and I thought, I don't really think that this is social practice. You know, it's kind of, we tend to lump everything into social practice. It doesn't feel like anything else. And I think that bringing it to you in social practice, which is a question that I have, is that for me, social practice is about doing something to make a change. To others in the community, organizing within the community and making something happen for that community. And I'm thinking about the curator, the director, to talk to her about that. We talked about what have the students in the university, have they come to this exhibition? What have they said? I mean, clearly the social practice aspect of this is talking about plus size, talking about body image, talking about not being ashamed of who you are and owning yourself. Did that happen? Is that going to happen? And I can ask both of you.
When I first hear about this idea, I didn't think about social practice. I didn't think about performance, because we have this program at the university called Mind Matters. It's about students' mental health. It was initiated 5 years ago by the wife of the president. So it's been really good program, and then it kind of expanded to not just mental health, you know, like health in general. So we have a lot of different programs and try to support students, like, you know, president sometimes serves food for the student during the final, and try to make them feel like it's a community they're living in, right? So when I heard her project, what came into my mind is about our issues. Every single of us, we think about our body all the time, and especially 21st century, you know, like a visual presentation of oneself is something like we can never avoid, and then we think about it all the time. So I think it's going to be great piece to engage in the dialogue. So that's what I was thinking. But when I bring it to the committee, that was something like really hitting on me, you know. All they talk about is like exposure of nudity. And I'm like, this is college environment. It's not high school, it's not elementary school, and we're not living in 70s or like even 80s. So I think we should educate our students to look at like what kind of visuals they're dealing with and how they can digest. So I think I was in a way naive or kind of ignorant, you know, like not thinking about everybody's perspective. So luckily, I invite some artists to talk to the advisory board, and they kind of convinced them. And then it happened, but the first student response I got was he is a male student, but he's homosexual. And he's not like an overweighted person, but when he came to see the show, he was literally crying. It really moved him to think about what we're dealing with. And then we talk about, there's Alan here, and Sarah is here, and then another Sarah, they're my assistant. And when we were installing the show, we were talking about this is not something we're looking at what we were talking about. So it just became like another level. So we have several classroom visits here, but they kind of look at it in their own subjects. So we have a fashion students, they came, and then they're thinking about, you know, how to construct like a clothing around, you know, this kind of thing. But they're not talking about like a nudity. They're not talking about those kind of things. So at the beginning, I was hearing some mean things, but after that, it's like everything is so positive. So,
Well, did anyone, let's say plus size, I'm using plus size because you agree that that's the name you accept. Did anybody come in and talk, or did you think about having, I don't know, because I don't know how the school works, but were there any dialogues with that, or?
There haven't been, so kind of touching on social practice, and I have thought about it as far as, and I've questioned, is it social practice, is it social activism, is it community engagement? And for me, I think it's all of it, because it's not just the exhibition, it's not just me posing, it's me collaborating with the artist. It's we created a catalog of the exhibition, and I told all of the artists to be here an hour early before the exhibition, and I invited everybody who had a catalog to come early so all the artists could sign the catalog. I gave all the artists, and Dana's here with hers, a name tag with, it has an image of the work and her name on it. That way, all of the artists are known, so it's not just about body image, not just about being plus size, but it's also about supporting the community of artists that I worked with, the 60 artists in this show, which is an extension of my PR company and Art and Cake and everything I do. So, and also, the work is for sale on my website, and 25% of the proceeds go to Mind Matters, the mental health, and we've already raised a couple $1,000s for them. So, yeah, it's been, there you go.
Now, this is kind of what I was asking, is that what do you leave your school with? What does this exhibition leave the school with?
one of the things I want to achieve, because I'm a director of the university gallery, right? And I want our students to see beyond the images and let them think about it, because we're talking about creativity and critical thinking skills, but if they can really not see what's behind of it, then I think that they're losing the whole point of a history and society and everything, right? So that's what I'm fighting for with the advisory board, because what I'm trying to bring in here is not about artists, it's not about what they're showing, what kind of idea behind of it. So they can really develop their critical thinking skills. And I teach here, so one of the class I teach is the graduate research methodology class. So these students has to develop their thesis idea in my class. And they're very good at describing how to make art, what kind of medium they use and what kind of skills they have to put it in there. But the conceptualizing it is very difficult. And I kept telling them, that's not just happen overnight. Maybe you can learn how to use the tool overnight, but how to conceptualizing what you're trying to present in your work, it takes a lot of knowledge. And you have to learn the history, and especially today, I'm so happy to hear about what you went through in your life, right? So those kind of things, I think it will really help our students.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would hope me and the other, I don't know about here, given the time frame and everything, but what I would hope for would be perhaps a panel or a talk like this, but with people who would be willing to talk, let's say from the mental health, that are dealing with this issue, and really be able to hear what it's like to live in that body and what happens.
Well, it's interesting. Before the exhibition, or I knew the exhibition was going to be here, and I was trying to think of activities that, that would take place here. A couple things. I'm also about community. So, thinking about the women's building, of course, and that being a community, and thinking about the artists I've worked with. And I wanted to do a consciousness raising here. With, and I talked to some of the artists who are also plus size, who, we had these intense conversations while we were working together, and, our schedules never met up, but because it's traveling, I know I'll have more opportunity, or, even outside of this, because this is not just going to end at the exhibition, it's going to continue on. And so, that is my plan, to keep telling the story, however I can, through film, through, through talks, through these, meetups, consciousness raising things like that. Definitely. I wanted to, and when we've proposed it to the different spaces, I've talked to I've talked to life drawing classes, to work with those classes, or, gender studies, to talk to those students also. I'm going to meet with Cole Case's class. He's one of the instructors here next Monday before the show comes down. And so, that's part of the community engagement also.
Right, and that's part of the collaboration. I was just going to say that, you've done everything. I mean, we all know that. I mean, you're just amazing. I mean, how your business and what you've done for other artists have created a community for you, and a community that is supportive, that I can understand you feeling safe in that community. And I just think, and you hung this, did you hung the
No, I had the amazing team,
Okay,
Mika's amazing staff. Yes, team.
Good. But let's put it, you've done all the PR, you've done everything. So I think that when I mention that, I don't mean to put more on your plate. I don't mean to say this is enough, isn't enough, you have to do more. But what I am saying is that I think, even for myself, it would be really interesting to hear the experiences of plus-size women who are willing to talk about their experience. I actually haven't heard that much about it personally. And I've heard a lot of women, but I haven't heard that story that much. So
well, I had mentioned in the last talk with Alexandra that one of my next exhibitions coming up it's titled 47, 45, 54, based on my measurements. And it's a fashion exhibition. I have a call out for proposals right now from artists and fashion designers to create an outfit based on my body, based on being plus size. And that was like an offshoot of this show because I found it easy, well, I don't know about easy, but easier to take off my clothes and pose nude. But when I wear clothing, I wear baggy clothes, to hide my curves. And so it's like, I'm still exploring that and challenging it and wondering why and where it comes from. And that's part of my art. That's why I do it, to challenge and question these things. But I'm like, well, why don't I do what I do and put together an exhibition about it? And so during that exhibition, it's in July, it's going to be at Keystone Art Space. I'm going to have like a plus size art fair and, inviting like a couple of plus size boutiques that nobody's heard of. And I'm going to like have talks about that. It's only 2 weeks. But I'm gonna we're gonna do a fashion show for the opening. I'm letting like everybody dress up, in costume. It's gonna be a party. It's gonna be a blast. So you're all like invited, of course. So keep your eyes out. But it is like an offshoot of this. It'll be another performance like Masquerade in a way, but it'll continue that conversation of being plus size, being comfortable in your skin or not, no matter what. And I think that's what I'll continue to do throughout my art practice, my art career, is to continually question that and continue these conversations about what it means to be plus size. I've talked about...
Can I
Sure.
One thing I wanted to say about feeling plus size is that how many, in quotes, either average weight women or thin women feel that they're plus size. It's like you can mix it up. Right? Just because you are plus size and you're not, plus size, you can still feel like you're plus size. I mean, I know that I can remember since I was in the 4th grade, I had an uncle that every time he saw me, he would tell me whether I gained weight or lost weight. And then someone would hit me on my stomach, and then it goes on and on. I've always thought that I was fat, whatever that means. And in a negative way, because that's the feedback that I was getting. And so I don't think that's the other piece I wanted to bring into it.
We were going to talk about this,
yes. Is that it's, I don't know, I think every woman, I have a friend, I hate this friend, she's like this big, and she's like, oh my God, I gained 4 pounds. And I have to go to the gym, and I have to do more weights, and I have to walk 20,000 steps. And then, you know, and you know, I'm like, okay. And I know this person since junior high. So, and she's always been this size. So, but for her, I have to listen, I have to hear her say that, you know, because that's how she feels. But I do know how it makes me feel. You know, because I have struggled with my weight all my life, whatever that means. And so, you know, when I hear that, it doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel like, gee, you know, like really looking at what have I done, you know, with myself all my life and the way I think about myself. And like you, I look at old pictures of myself. I'm not fat. I look great then, but I didn't feel that.
Yeah, and that's one of my projects is I used to carry around an envelope with all of my skinny pictures, you know, from when I was like 20, because I was thin up until like I was 24, 25. And then I probably weighed like 170, and I went on the fin. You know, I don't know if you remember the fin. I was very lucky not to have any of the health problems from it. I mean, even 160, 170 is not that heavy compared to, I'm 250 pounds now. And so I went down to like 130, I think, at that time. And then, of course, I gained it all back. But I used to carry around photos from when I was younger, when I was even on the fin, of when I was thin, you know, as inspiration, thinking that, oh, I can look that way again. Of course, that's like 20, you know, 30 years ago, and it's like, of course, I'm never going to look that way again. But it was, so I'm using that in my art, and that's become a project. I thought I was fat, because one of those pictures, I was 12, I think, and I was beautiful. I was thin, I was tall, I had long legs that were like, went on forever, you know, and I had a t-shirt over my bathing suit, you know, and I remember wearing that t-shirt because I thought I was fat, and that's the name of the project, I thought I was fat. Also really fast, and then I know Mika had a point, I also had a friend from the age of 10, 11, I think, through, we haven't talked in like 10 years now, same exact thing, and that is, it made me feel like, you know,
crap.
Yeah, and like I was fat.
Yeah.
And so I know, I mean, my eating disorder, there's many reasons for it, but a lot of it is because of how, like, society, culture, you know, family, friends,
Patriarchy.
You know, patriarchy. I mean, I have family that used to go to Weight Watchers and they weighed 150 pounds. You know, so I felt that I was overweight. I was fat and I had to lose weight. And it just becomes ingrained in you and you feel like you're not worthy, and which is the subject of my therapy appointment this morning. And you know.
Or if you're anorexic, it's the opposite of the same story.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
You know, so I mean, this is a huge, huge issue that we're bringing up, and it is a mental health issue.
I appreciate you bring that up. You know, there's some people, they feel fat, right? And then another thing is, you just bring it up, the anorexia and the bulimics, right? It's the same problem. It just have a different, you know, look. So it leads to the mental health. It leads to the physical health, right?
I mean, anyone that looks at this show can identify with it.
Exactly.
I mean, there isn't any, you just do. And it isn't, it's because you have these feelings all your life too. I mean, you know, a lot of people think there are other people that feel tall and thin. That's enough. You know, too thin, too tall, too whatever. We're always too something. But when are we enough, I guess, is the question. When are we enough just as we are? And what you said, what was interesting was how you're getting, perceive me means how others look at me versus how you look at you.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing, because we do so much care about how we're perceived in every way. And
you know, it's really interesting. So I put on Google Alerts, I put perceive me, so I can keep an eye out, you know, for anything that comes up. And every day I get 4 or 5 alerts, like from celebrity sites, talking about like how they're perceived. I mean, perceive me in quotes comes up, and it's like, well, they perceive me this way or they perceive me that way. And it's really, I should save those. I mean, it's really fascinating
What do you mean?
to see. I mean, I haven't read the articles fully, but for one may have been about J-Lo or, and it was just, I don't remember. It was like, just how like people see them, you know, and so, but that it was press and that it was, I don't know, it's something I need to look at more, that the idea of perception and of valuing others' opinions is so prevalent in our culture. And it was something that I did talk about in therapy this morning, the idea of what that means and why can't we value ourselves? Like, why can't we value our own self-worth, you know, and know that we're worthy without the opinion of others? And I mean, is there anybody that, you know, it's yeah.
Can I pitch in?
Sure. Amanda is an amazing performance artist.
I mean, there's a lot that I would like to say, but I'm just going to focus on this
I
one.
know. There's a lot to say.
There's a lot. I feel like the idea of perceiving a body and perceiving especially a female body is looked at and it's still judged by patriarchy. And it's still described in media, described in all around us by women, not just men, because women are sometimes just as bad in living in this, like, we are each other's worst enemy. And it hurts more when it comes from a woman's perspective.
Yes.
I think, I mean, personally, it hurts much more. But my question to you is, like, from the beginning of the project, when you were obfuscating yourself, because you were behind a door still, and it was just your shadow playing.
Mm-hmm.
And you felt like safe with each artist, like you men, women, across the board. But has anything changed for you or shifted your own perspective of yourself through the process of taking your clothes off to somebody else?
Not really.
Yeah.
I've gained more weight throughout the process. And it's interesting though, because actually I get asked that a lot, how much I've changed throughout the process. And I haven't, I mean, and I look at the art in the show and I look at my body and I see it as beautiful. I mean, I really do. I see it as fun. I see the pieces as joyous. I see the art as wonderful. But I also physically, I remember like how uncomfortable I was laying on concrete with those stiletto heels for Austin Yan. Or, you know, like posing, you know, differently, like, you know, my leg being sore, like Debbie and Larry's piece in the other room. I had to like be like this within like a certain, they had tape on the wall, and like I couldn't keep my arms up for very long because they were very sore. So I'm, you know, and maybe this is part of like the performance, like stepping in and out of it, I still feel the physicality of it where I have a hard time seeing the beauty of my own body personally. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, you're still in the process. I mean,
And that's what you said too, yeah.
It's not like you're healed.
Yeah.
But I think that the awareness of where you are and how you're feeling is important. And
Yeah, I would ask a question, sort of state a question. A lot of what you're talking about is actually surprising to me in terms of the insecurity that you seem to bring to this, because for me, the show is such a positive and powerful way to redefine, instead of how you're perceiving it, but how the audience comes in and perceives it. So that whoever owns the images and the perpetuation of the images defines what is beautiful. If all we saw were these images, we would all begin to want these images, as if it was suddenly a fashion thing where it's now high-waisted and you go, that looks ridiculous. You see it 3 times and you want to buy it. Similarly, when I walk into this room and I see this, I start to go, I completely accept this as a form of beauty. but you haven't been able to disconnect enough to see the strength and the power of how just by the act of presenting 60 images of someone with this body type, you are actively healing the society,
Yeah.
even if you're not
That's
healing
true.
yourself.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
that is a really.
I think you would feel that some. I don't want to speak for you, but I think Kristine does, you know, when I've heard people say, and I said, people keep saying you're so brave. But also you must feel pride. You can't, I don't believe that you could walk in here and not feel proud.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think within that pride there is a healing, because it went from shame originally to exposing and being vulnerable to walking away and feeling proud. And so I think that though you may still not like things about your body, you're having gone through the experience, and on top of this, in a sense, producing it, curating. I mean, other producers and curators, but everything that you did for this and the collaboration, you have to go out there and go like, I'm bitching. You know what I mean? There's like there's some sense of that, right?
Yeah. And after like the opening reception, and I received like so many compliments, not just about the show, but about the organization and the curation and the production of it all. And I know that was me, you know, and that, I am extremely proud of that. I know how hard I worked on it, but it's an interesting thing, and I was just talking about this with my therapist, how that's a business, you know, and this is personal. And there is still a disconnect. And yes, that why I do art about my body is for healing, but it doesn't just happen overnight. You know, it's a process. And I think we'll always be like processing and challenging ourselves, and nobody is ever happy.
There's no end to this.
Yeah.
Can I say one more sentence about something I noticed, Kristine, and the artists who are here who worked on, you can say it. Certainly in this
Are you
room.
one of the artists?
No.
Oh, okay.
Certainly in this room, but what I remember at the opening is in every photo, every piece of art, there's joy. So even if you just took away that, everybody perceived you joyously. You're either smiling or you got a sparkle or a twinkle, or there's something going on that's in every single thing, which means you bring joy to these people, and you're bringing it to those of us that are looking at the exhibition.
Yeah, and I'm proud of that. And just so Debbie and Dana, I think, are there any other artists here? But raise your hands. Debbie and Dana are two of the artists in the show. So. And Debbie did.
One of the things I wanted to say is that it began as a collaboration, and it will continue always to be a collaboration of sorts because of the conversation. And I think all of us have something to contribute with how we're affected by it visually or emotionally. So many of us cried walking in when we saw the work in its enormity and all of it at once. I liken what you've done as if you are a conductor and you have this composition that is going to be realized. It's not complete. And you've chosen us, the artists, as your musicians and your instruments to play it as you've given us this composition. And then it continues to be written and evolved. I remember feeling, you had asked how do we feel when we were working with Kristine, and I told her, as soon as she just took her robe off and was fully herself exposed and vulnerable before me, I saw her, one, as childlike, that she needed to be cared for, very in such a gentle way, in a loving way. And I also felt that she was as a divine, like a queen, because she had to come up on a pedestal for me to photograph her. So I took her hand as if I were escorting her, and as if, and it's so ironic because it's the Superwoman pose, as if you had this robe, like a cape, and then you went up. And
I was afraid of falling.
I know, and she had to be so careful, very careful. And then as soon as you put the robe on, it was as if the veil had changed. And then we did a couple of other shots and the veil would come off. So each time I felt the same way. And I asked you afterwards, how do you feel while this is happening during this interaction? Do you feel as beautiful as I see you? And you said two things, and now, since this conversation, now I'm forgetting which was which. But one was that, yes, you did feel it, and I can't remember if you said if you felt it inside or if you felt it externally. But there was a disconnect, to use your word, with how you saw yourself. And of course, this is a lifelong thing, but it is wonderful each step and how this is happening that you're exposing. I mean, this is such a courageous thing to do. And I think when I walk in, could I do this? We all say that. I don't think I could do this. So you're amazing.
Thank you.
And thank you for asking me as one of the artists to be involved.
You're welcome.
Sherry?
I was thinking we were talking about earlier how, there's been controversy about all the nudes and, people taking the exhibition. I was thinking that is completely absurd because if you think about art history, let's say instead this was an exhibition, a showcase of the best work coming out of the figure drawing class, every image in here would be nude. And nobody would have anything to say about it. What's different about the history of that in art history is female bodies posing for male artists where the subject has no agency about her own image. And what you've done here is, it's the same nudity, should be the same rules, but no, but what you've done is you're saying, this is my body, you are a woman, you're taking it back, you are subject, you are, the gaze, you flip the gaze.
Yeah.
You're looking out at us and saying, here's who I am. And I think, when, I'm so glad you said patriarchy, because we have to think about when we feel bad about ourselves as women in our bodies, why is that? And who gains from us not feeling good about ourselves? And of course, we live in this huge construct. And I taught filmmaking for years, and I used to teach my students media literacy and remind them that a commercial is about making you feel bad about yourself. That's a function of a commercial, because you feel bad about yourself, you need the product that they're selling to make you feel better about yourself. And so there's this huge economic system set up around us feeling bad about ourselves. I mean, I can't even imagine how much money is made over that thing. And so as women, this is really major. So when you're like, oh, I don't feel healed or whatever, how could you? Thousands of years of this kind of thinking, you're one little person, how can you, so we really have to, work together, and men need to work with us on this. What is beautiful? And when we, when our friend makes us, talks about 4 pounds or whatever, like that needs to then kind of step back and be in a conversation about, wait, why do we both feel bad about ourselves? This is not okay. And we need to support each other out of this. And we need men to support us too.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Well, I think men, just throwing that in, looking at my husband, he never notices anything. So, the ones that are noticing it are my daughter or women in my life. I mean.
Well, who bound in China, who bound women's feet? Their mothers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like shifting a point of view. Like when you perceive society perceives everything through the male point of view.
Yeah.
We do that too. I'm trying to change that with myself. So by watching only female filmmakers, or by reading books by women, by really watching what they are talking about and reading what they have to say, you are kind of reclaiming this idea of the muse. You are a muse. I mean, I feel like you are my muse right now in this space, but you are shifting the perspective of what this looks like in the world from, a male point of view versus like what we can actually see beauty in this from your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that I know how important this show is, not just in terms of what I've done, like bearing all, but because, just like Sherry said also, I'm taking back control over who has control of my body, as like you know, yes, there's male artists too, but I gave them the control to draw or paint me or sculpt me. As the muse, as the model, as the curator of the exhibition, as the artist of this whole project. It's, you know, I've talked to people and they're like, I don't think anybody's done this before. And it's scary, you know, to think about just that control that I'm taking and if that's going to be taken away from me somehow too. I don't know. But no, I mean, I'm also happy to do that because it needs to be done and it's time. You know, I mean, it's been time for a long time, but, you know, I mean, since, you know, the feminist movement, I mean, we're still fighting. And so this is my way of continuing that.
I'm going to add one thing to this. This is one thing I wanted to remember to bring up, and I guess Sherry will remember and Anne will remember too, is that back then, the way in which women were in public around their feminism, for example, I mentioned I did demonstration weight. Well, I was wearing, I mean, black and white clothes. I was really covered up. There was nothing about the body that I was actually showing. And then you look at the kind of performances that I did, as well as Suzanne and we all did on different issues regarding violence against women, where when I directed these performances, let's say in 3 Weeks in May that I did, all the women that were in my public performance in a mall wore blindfolds. But they were not, they were out of kind of a netting, so they could see. But the idea was for them to be anonymous and not be afraid to be out there, because it was risky for them. And then when I was in Germany, and it was being done at Cal Arts, women were wrapping themselves in gauze. I don't know if you remember, if you look back at images of women, they're all wrapped up in gauze when they're public. And that was the, you know, of course we were silenced, we were repressed. This was how we saw ours, like a mummy.
What about Guerrilla Girls?
And
they're always hidden.
Right, but Guerrilla Girls is a little different in that image of the gorilla is a very strong image that says, don't mess with me. But in the way we were using it at the time, it was expressing our feelings of not being able to be open and not being able to say what's on our mind and not being able to say, I'm Leslie doing this, I'm all women because I'm wearing a blindfold, because it was dangerous. And you don't really understand that danger. Certainly in a show like this, you don't. But if you're from the generation that I'm from, it was dangerous to do those kinds of things in public. I mean, in 1977, when we did 3 Weeks in May, domestic violence wasn't illegal. So you have to understand, you know, it's hard to understand what the Crusaders, of which I was one, but there's Andrea Dworkin, and there's on and on and on, the incredible work that was written about this, the courage that it took to do all this. And so, but my point about talking about that is that here I'm talking about blindfolded women that are all wrapped in gauze, and then here we are, right? Where we're all letting it all hang out. That is a big, big, big step. And you don't even think about that. You did create a safe place, kind of, but still, you never told me anything about it. I was going to bring up, which one? Oh, well, Sherry, when I was in 70, when I was working at the Women's Building, right, we did, I was like the PR person there, but Sherry and Sue Mabry and other women, we had this sculpture, the Kate Millett sculpture, and do you all know who Kate Millett is?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, because I don't know anymore. This is kind of, so she created this huge paper mache sculpture of a big woman, right? Big everything, arms, naked, huge woman. And so we needed to get rid of it, to be frank, right? It was like taking up space. It isn't the most beautiful sculpture in the world. It was like, so what do? We made a media event out of it, and we stuck it up on the top of the Women's Building, and we called it,
The Naked Lady Rise.
The Naked Lady
Rise.
of LA has changed.
Something Naked Lady Rise.
The point we were making was is that this is what the lady and great lady of LA looks like now, something like that. So we did this media event, and it ended up on the front page of the LA Times. It was like amazing, you know. It was an amazing thing, and we felt really great about it, you know. And so there was a talk about that a little bit. I mean, did it do much good? No, but it was still interesting how when we told them, that's what we did. We took control of the media and what the media said about us. So the way we presented it was, this is how women in LA are right now: powerful, strong, big women. And
thankfully, right now we also have like Lizzo, you know,
yeah,
who is out there, proud, who's, you know, there's a lot of body positivity going on. I must follow 20 or 30 plus size women. And this was actually something I was going to talk about earlier. The word plus size. My exhibition was called Plus, and my previous exhibition with the shadow work, I called it Plus, and I thought about different titles for it, because like plus size has always meant being, you know, fat, being overweight. And I've recently talked to people about what the term overweight means and how like negative of a term that is. That means you're not, like, that means there is an ideal and you're over that. That means it's not perfect. And there's people taking back the word fat, you know, trying to make fat not a derogatory word, just a descriptive word. And so I felt like plus had like so many different layers to it. You know, plus is a very positive word. I was just going to say, unless you take a pregnancy test. But for the most part.
I'm not a linguist, but I know Yiddish. And in Yiddish, there's a word for fat. It's called zaftig. I don't know if you know.
but that's a good word, right?
And zaftig is a totally positive thing. Wow. Women being zaftig. It's the way that they would refer to women being plump at the turn of the last century. It was a positive connotation.
And just one thing I realized I wanted to put into as it relates to this is that as you take this forward and think about how to expand conversations, I think it's really important to bring in the conversation about this image in different cultural contexts.
Yes,
because
definitely.
for African American women, this
Yeah,
may
right.
have different meanings, and then also historically.
No, because
Yeah.
there's you know,
So
the whole thing of like
yeah,
exotic
yeah.
is like a good thing.
Yeah,
Everything else is you can
beautiful.
afford to,
Yeah.
Well, like, you know, like Reuben's women. I mean, at that time, being fat meant you were wealthy, you could feed yourself, you know.
Well, do you
That's
remember around 1970 something when first it was Sophia Loren and Rocco Welch were thought to be beautiful, and then Twiggy arrived, and you were completely confused? It's right in the middle of your preteen years, the image of beauty, one image.
Well, Marilyn Monroe was like size 14, I think.
I know, and so
You know.
Twiggy and that.
Yeah.
But when Betty reviewed this show and she spoke about the statues, that tiny little statue
Yeah.
of the Zofted woman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, like
What-
the Venus of Women. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
we could go on forever here, but I you plugged me into the matriarchy, and you've gone to Malta, right?
Yeah.
And Greece, and you've gone to the sites which show. Want to tell us a little bit about?
Well, just, you want to say something?
Well, in Malta, there's only the remains of the great ladies, but she was cut off like at the knees. So what you see in the temple is just her feet and the base, but they have little replicas, little sculptures that were found. So you could see that she was a very large woman.
And then the temples in Malta are built as a woman, and they're very round, and you enter through the vagina, and that's the big chamber, and then there's a smaller chamber, and then the final chamber is the head. So it's almost kind of like a snowman shape to think about. But yeah, and so a celebration of the full figured woman.
So I know we're going to end this at some point, right? We're on the stage. I want to bring up one other thing, which changes the whole picture of this thing, which has to do with this obesity, not scare, but the statistics that they're talking about now about how obesity is such a danger in our culture, particularly in poverty, low-income areas, and that they're saying that, I mean, we're in LA, right? We're not anywhere else in the country, but they're saying that in 10 years, 1 out of 3 women and men will be on this idea of obese. And that is certainly presented not as a beauty thing, as much as a health thing. And so there's this kind of weird competition for what does that mean? Is it, you know, I don't know the answer to this. I just know that I read about this and I'm thinking, I know that I went to my doctor, and I've heard this from others, when they measure your BMI, I was told I was obese. So, you know, and I'm like, are you sure? You know, how do I? Well, because the BMI, they have this thing about a BMI is over 25, that means you're on the list. So it's like there's a lot of people with different body types going to doctors, and for their cholesterol or for their whatever, they're telling them, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. That's the mantra of the doctors today.
But that isn't necessarily not true. That if you lose body fat, your cholesterol goes down. That's true.
Well, yes, I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm just saying that in a way we're talking about accepting our bodies for who we are and our bodies, and yet this is another part of the culture telling us that that's not okay, that it's all better if all of us are as thin as we possibly can be because it's good for our heart, our health, our our diabetes and all that stuff. I'm just saying that's what's out there. So how do we you know, combine that with everything we've talked about today?
You know, I mean, I worked in the medical field for a long time. And I, you know, I have regular doctor's appointments. My dad died at 50 of a heart attack and I'm 47. So I worry about that all the time. My lab work's perfect. My blood pressure has always been perfect. My cholesterol is just at the level. So I mean, I'm pretty healthy, you know, except for like, you know, I need to get a little, you know, I need to be able to run or walk faster, you know, but I mean, and be a little more flexible. But I mean, I am healthy. I know people who are very thin who have high cholesterol, who have high blood pressure. I mean, my dad wasn't overweight and he had high blood pressure. He died of a heart attack. He smoked all the time. And he drank Diet Pepsi like crazy, like it was water. So, you know, I wish that stigma would go away and that there would be a different conversation that would open up and it wouldn't just be about obesity and what that means.
Well, I think that they are saying that they call them desert, what's it called? Food deserts. You know, where, and I was in the food business, so I kind of know what they're talking about, where they're saying that in certain parts of the cities, and they're usually in low-income poverty areas, they don't have access to healthy food.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are eating all the junk food and et cetera, et cetera. People don't have money, homeless don't have money, they're eating whatever they can get, fast food or whatever. And so it becomes really, looking at it from a nutritional aspect, is that if you're not able to get good, healthy food, you potentially are going to be, you know, have more illnesses, which is proven to be true. So, you know, it is a little confusing for me even to say that. I had one of the women that worked for me for about 30 years. I started her as a helper and with a nanny, and she became like a VP, and she's great. And she was a big woman, plus size woman always, and her blood work was perfect. She never had any problems on her blood work. So, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to end on that note, but I just felt that it was, you know, it is out there. That you have to look at that. So,
Are there? Oh, yes.
I wanted to make a comment that I don't know Kristine, but I started to see images of the show come up, and I thought this is really interesting. But I didn't only see a body, I saw a face, and a portrait that was being repeated, and I thought, who is this person? Because she was very compelling, and it seemed that the artists honored her. So you were being elevated up, and it was more than a body to me. So now that I'm learning it's almost all about body, I feel like there's another layer that we're missing that is about you as a person that's being honored and is obviously cherished.
It's true. And we didn't really talk much about that, but I do feel the love. I mean, I absolutely feel the love. And when I first, before we had the opening reception and the show had just been on, I walked in and there was a professor in here looking at the work, and he recognized me. He looked at me and he said, you know, there's so much joy, and you know, I just want to smile. And I've heard that it's just, you know, a very joyful exhibition. And I think that, I hope that I'm that way as a person.
You are.
And it comes out.
Sure you are.
Yeah.
Sure you are.
We had just a few more minutes left.
You didn't really have any trolls or whatever you had to face by trolling. But if you ever do, challenge them to spend an hour in this exhibit, and I think it will change them.
That's interesting.
Regardless of their level of sophistication or understanding of art in general, or the many issues that you're dealing with, that joy thing alone, I think, transcends all levels of, you know, culture and understanding.
Thank you. You know, we were talking earlier, so it's going to travel, and the next place it's traveling is in November to Oxnard City College, McNish Gallery, and it's a smaller gallery. It's like a lot smaller, and so it's probably going to be hung salon style. But I think that's going to be interesting to see it like hung that way, and to see the impact of it then, and to see if the message changes at all. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah.
I see this as the multiple faces and aspects of the same goddess. This is a goddess exploration.
Yeah. Thank you. And
it transcends everything else, it's goddess. That's you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Leslie.